all across the world. We've been concentrating on various different places all over South America quite recently. We've spoken about Uruguay, Cuba, we've spoken about I think Colombia and various other countries actually based in South America. So today we're going to speak about Brazil over here in this special edition. Concentrate on the country of Brazil. So obviously we are much more familiar about South America than we were previously, because obviously we've recorded all these videos, so we're going to explore some of the history and some of the great rabbis that came in the famous synagogues. Now, the history of Jews in Brazil begins during the settlement of Europeans in the New World. Although only baptized Christians, as you say, were subject to Inquisition, Jews started settling in Brazil when the Inquisition would reach Portugal in the 16th century. They arrived in Brazil during the period of Dutch rule, setting up Recife, the first synagogue in the Americas, the Kahal Sur Israel synagogue, which was built in the year 1636. We can speak about it in due course. I think it was actually it was nearly all Sephardic Jews over there who fled the Inquisition in Spain and Portugal to the religious freedoms at that point in time of the Netherlands. So I think currently there's up to maybe as many as 120,000 Jewish people living in Brazil. I think most the main cities are Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and Porto Alegre. So obviously the main Jewish languages is Brazilian, Portuguese, Hebrew, Ladino, and there's people that will also still speak Yiddish even imported over. So very, very interesting. So we're going to speak about the Portuguese Inquisition and some of the history now in this very detailed video. Now, the Portuguese Inquisition, let's just say at the time period, expanded its scope operations from Portugal to Portugal's colonial possessions, including Brazil, Cape Verde and Goa, where it continued investigating and trying cases based on supposed breaches of Orthodox Roman Catholicism until 1821. As a colony of Portugal, Brazil was affected by the near 300 years of repression of the Portuguese Inquisition, which started in the year 1536. Much is chronicled by various different, let's say, chroniclers. I think someone named Adam Smith, in his Wealth of Nations, will attribute much of the development of Brazil's sugar industry and cultivation to the, let's say, Portuguese Jewish people that were forced out of Portugal during the Inquisition. After the Brazilian Constitution 1824, this will actually grant freedom of religion. The Jewish people began to arrive gradually in Brazil. Many of them happen to have been Moroccan Jews, arrived in the 19th century, principally because of the rubber boom, that's at that point in time. And they would settle in the Amazon basin, where many of their descendants continue actually to live modern day. There was waves of Jewish immigration occurred in areas like Russia, Poland, many Jewish people that were escaping pogroms and the Russian Revolution, and obviously the German Jews in 1930s, obviously with the rise of Nazism, that would lead to a big wave of movings, let's just say. Another wave of immigration brought thousands of North African Jews. Now, by the 21st century, the Jewish communities were thriving in Brazil. There were anti-Semitic events that have taken place, especially during the Lebanon War in 2006. There was vandalism of Jewish cemeteries brought over. But in main, Brazil's Jewish population is considered, let's just say, from a secular sphere, highly educated. 68% of the community holding university degrees, reported over, I'm not sure which stage, using Wikipedia as a source, employed mainly in business, law, medicine, engineering, and so on and so forth. So very, very interesting. So reported over, come with the year 2010, Brazil had the 10th largest Jewish community in the world of 107,329 people, according to the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics, and has the second largest population in Latin America after Argentina, respectively. So actually, I think, in fact, the Jewish Confederation of Brazil estimates there are more than 120,000 Jews in Brazil. This is at a recent recording, I believe. So let's explore a bit more. So there have been Jews in what is now known as Brazil since the first Portuguese arrived in the country in 1500. There was someone named Mestre João and Gaspar da Gama who arrived in the first ships. A number of Sephardic Jews immigrated to Brazil in its early settlements. They were known as the New Christians or Conversos or Moranos. Jews were obliged to convert to Roman Catholicism by the Portuguese crown. The Jewish people from Portugal avoided immigrating to Brazil because they would be persecuted at that point in time by the Inquisition. Most of the Portuguese conversos took refuge in Mediterranean countries such as North Africa, Italy, Greece, and the Middle East. And others emigrated to countries that tolerated Judaism, emigrated to places like the Netherlands, England, and Germany. Many Sephardic Jews from Holland and England worked with the maritime trade of the Dutch Western India Company, especially with the sugar production, as mentioned before, in the northeast of Brazil. Now, it's interesting, the first Jews who arrived in South America, obviously, as we said, were Sephardic Jews, obviously people that were expelled from Portugal, and they would settle in the northeast of the Dutch colony. And there was famous Kehal Israel synagogue. It was his first synagogue, obviously established in 1936. And the community of about 1,450 Sephardic Jews would live there. When the Portuguese retook Recife in 1654, 23 Jewish people from the community escaped to the Dutch North American colony of New Amsterdam, and that I think in 1664 would become, obviously naturally, New York City. Now, I think in the final decades of the 18th century, some conversos came to southeastern Brazil to work in the gold mines. Many were arrested, they were accused of Judaism. Brazilian families that descend from the conversos are mainly, I think, concentrated in the states of Minas Gerais, Rio de Janeiro, Para and Bahia, respectively, over there. Most, I think, various different sources would state that the first synagogue of Belém is the Shar HaShamayim, Gate of Heaven, which was founded in the year 1824. I think, so much was actually spoken over with regards to Samuel ben Shimon that was connected with that specific area, but I think it was founded either in 1823, 1824, or 1826 to 1828. The Jewish population in Graaparo had as many as had by 1842 an established necropolis, it's reported over. It was Samuel ben Shimon, first of all. He was a famous Brazilian person. I think he was born in the year 1923 and passed away in 2002. He was a Brazilian economist, a scientist, and professor, someone of Moroccan Jewish descent. Obviously the name Ben Shimon now. He was also one of the leading experts on the Amazon region. He assigned, let's say, a Amazonian Academy of Literature and a professor of emeritus at the Federal University of Amazonas. He was a researcher, also a community leader, and the president of the Comité Israélite do Amazon, and an entrepreneur, founding, let's just say, member of the group Bemol and Fogas, respectively. He was born in Brazil, in Manaus, I think in 1923. He passed away in Manaus in 2002, July the 5th. He was 78 years of age. So he was just a famous key person there. Now let's talk about the agricultural settlements. Because there was unfavorable conditions in Europe, European Jews would begin debating in the 1890s about establishing agricultural settlements in Brazil. I think it didn't work at first. I think there was different debates in Brazil, political quarrels, let's just say. Come on, 1904, the Jewish agricultural colonization, supported by the Jewish Colonization Association, began in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, and the southernmost state in Brazil. The main intention, let's just say, of this JCA was creating those colonies was to resettle Russian Jews during the mass immigration from hostile Russian Empire. The first colonies over there at that point in time was Philipson and Quattro, I think, from 1904, 1912, respectively. These colonization attempts failed, I think, because of inexperience, poor planning, insufficient funds. Also at that point in time, come on, 1920, more would happen. Now, I think by the First World War, about 7,000 Jews were inhabiting in Brazil. In 1910, I think in Porto Alegre, this was the capital of Rio Grande do Sul. There was a Jewish school, I think, and a Yiddish newspaper was established, I think in 1915. 1 year later, the Jewish community of Rio de Janeiro formed an aid committee for World War I victims. Now, the Congregação Espírita Paulista was the largest synagogue in Brazil at the time, was founded by someone named Dr. Fritz Pincus, who was born in Eglin in Germany, obviously Ashkenazi Jewish people. The Association Religion Israelite, now I think it's more associated with the Progressive Judaism branch of the World Union, was founded by someone called Dr. Heinrich Lemmel, who immigrated, I think, from Frankfurt to Rio de Janeiro in 1941. There was a hospital in Sao Paulo, was founded in 1955 and inaugurated in 1971. I think it was actually called Albert Einstein Israelite Hospital. I think it had medical and nursing school and considered one of the best medical centers in Latin America. Unfortunately, there was a lot of anti-Semitism, and that would be heightened during 1933 to 1945 with the ascent of Nazism in Germany. Brazil blocked its doors to the influx of Jewish refugees from Europe during the Holocaust. Research by the Brazil's Virtual Archives on the Holocaust and Anti-Semitism Institute, I think, had uncovered that between 1937 to 1950, more than 16,000 visas were issued to European Jews attempting to escape the Nazis, were denied by the governments of Presidents Guilherme Vargas and Eurico Gaspar Dura. That's what's reported over. Now, as we said before, they had currently about the 10th largest Jewish community in the world, according to the latest census. Half of Brazilian Jews would live in Sao Paulo, a quarter in Rio de Janeiro, and sizable communities in states of Rio Grande do Sul, Paraná, Minas Gerais, Pernambuco, Bahia, Para, and Amazonas. Now, I think the Brazilian Jewish community is composed of Ashkenazic Jewish of Central and Eastern European origin and Sephardic Jewish people, also of Iberian, mostly a lot of Iberian people, and Middle Eastern origin. It's unclear which group is more numerous, that's reported over. Both groups exist in large cities of Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, where they have mixed to some extent in the North region. Most Jews are Sephardic in the South region, are Sephardic, and that's in the North. And in the South region, the majority are Ashkenazic. That's what's actually reported over here, which is very, very interesting. So let's explore more within regards to the history of Brazilian Jewry. As we said before, Brazilian Jews take a very active role in politics, in sports, academia, trade, industry, and are, let's say, well integrated, many of them, in the spheres of Brazilian life. The Jewish people, there's many people with an open religious life over there, but there's many religious communities also over there where like to explore the history from the religious sphere of the great countries over here in general. Now, Jews, so it's, I think in the main urban centers are schools, associations, and synagogues where Brazilian Jewish people can practice and pass on Jewish culture and traditions, just using Wikipedia as a source. Some Jewish scholars say that the only threat facing Judaism in Brazil is unfortunately the high frequency of intermarriage, which I believe in 2002 was estimated as high as 60%. Intermarriage is especially high among the country's Jews and Arabs over there. Now, as of 2006, no more, it's reported over here, sadly, no more than 20% of Brazilian Jews kept kosher. And then maybe this figure, hopefully, let's say, is higher at this stage in time. Brazilian Jews, there's many Orthodox people that will, let's say, consider themselves conservative, reform, or secular. And most Brazilian Jews reported over, I think, at one stage in time, Wikipedia, are affiliated, I think, the majority with conservative synagogues, respectively. Very interesting. But I think most Brazilian, many are, until late 1930s, Orthodox Judaism was a main form of Judaism. Obviously, that was due to the immigration of Eastern European Jews also, but I think Central European Jewish immigrants would introduce Reform Judaism later on, and that unfortunately would take over. And many people obviously will associate themselves with Israel and Zionism. Chabad has a growing influence in Brazil in recent years. The majority of Brazilian Jews, obviously, which are Ashkenazi, of Polish and German descent, where there is also a significant Sephardic and Mizrahi Jewish population of Lebanese, Syrian, Moroccan, and Egypt descent, respectively, over there. So, obviously, there's been a steady stream, let's just say, of Aliyah, immigration to Israel, since the nation's foundation in 1948. Between 1948 to 2021, more than 16,000 Brazilians immigrated to Israel. Very interesting. Friends, anyone joining in the live stream at the moment, we are exploring the history of Brazilian Jewry. So please subscribe to the channel if you haven't joined our community yet. And we do a lot of great content, so please subscribe, everyone. So Sao Paulo, I think as of the 2010 consensus, had as many as more than 50,000 Jewish people located over there, which is obviously a very high number. And Rio de Janeiro with about 24,000 afterwards, respectively. You know, there's famous Brazilians. We want to talk more about the religious figures in of itself, but some, let's just say, the historical, let's just say, famous people was including Davi Alcolumbre, who was the senator and president of the Brazilian Senate, and Yom Tov Azulay were film directors, Hector Bebekano, another film director, and Samuel Ben Shimon, famous entrepreneur from Brazil, respectively, who mentioned about before, Daniel Benzali, a TV actor, physician writer Marcelo Samuel Berman, an army commander Abraham Benton, but there was many more famous people. But we want to try and speak about rabbis more in of this stuff. Now, obviously, we're an Orthodox Jewish channel, but let's just say a rabbi that was associated more in the Reform sphere, who was quite well known among academics and people internationally, was someone named Henry Sobel. He lived between 1944 to 2019. I think he died in Miami. He was a Portuguese American, but he was associated with Reform movement, so we don't really speak much about Reform movement. There was I think maybe he was also associated with conservative movement. He was a president of the Congregação Israel Polissa. It was, let's say, a major, let's say, Jewish congregation in Sao Paulo. I think more towards the non-Orthodox stream. You know, so he was born in Lisbon, but he was the son of Ashkenazic Jews that fled Nazi persecution during the Second World War. He was born in Lisbon, and he moved to New York City, where he grew up and was ordained as a Reform rabbi over there in 1970. This was. So I'm speaking about him because I don't really speak about Reform or conservative rabbi so much, but he was obviously a key figure in Brazil, just I think fighting anti-Semitism and in and out. So he would become, I think, the rabbi with this Congregação Israel Polissa. He would establish himself in Sao Paulo, and I think he was, in 2007, he would share the rabbinate with two other people, Michel Schlesinger and Yehuda Baskula, at that point in time. But he would also protect a lot of human rights in Brazil, so he was seen as a key person. I mean, in the secular sphere of Judaism. He denounced the assassination of that point of a journalist named Vladimir Herzl by a right-wing militant in Brazil. So he did a lot of inter-religious dialogue in Brazil also, and I think it was connected to Pope John Paul II over there. So he was 30 years over there, and once again he wasn't an Orthodox rabbi. So we're really trying to concentrate on the famous Orthodox rabbis of Brazil. He was just a key figure, let's just say, within regards to the scope of Brazilian Jewry over there in itself. Let's speak about the Kol Sor Israel synagogue, which is a famous Sephardic synagogue in Brazil, one of the oldest ones over there. I think it's also known as the Congregation Rock of Israel in English over there, located on the Recife on the state of Pernambuco in northeast Brazil, respectively. Over there. Let's speak a bit within regards to this congregation over here. Anyone tuning in on live video, we're exploring the history of Brazilian Jewry over here today. So please everyone subscribe if you're new to the channel. This synagogue was established in the year 1636 by the Portuguese and Spanish Sephardic Jews who had taken refuge in Dutch Brazil, fleeing forced conversion, and were joined by new Christians who possibly, let's say, helped to build the structure and were already living in the colony at that point in time. It was the first synagogue erected in the Americas. The building was destroyed in the early part of the 20th century, and a new building was constructed on the same site that now serves as a Jewish museum. The museum features a Torah and a bima, as well as archaeological excavations displaying various parts of the original synagogue, especially as also mikveh. That's something that we have to point over also. More can be said within regards to the synagogue. I think in 1630, a famous man, Moses Cohen Henriquez, a rabbi, I think the man we've spoken about, I think he was a rabbi, but I'm not too sure. He led a contingent of Itamaraca, an island of Brazil. From there, they settled in Recife after the retirement of the circuit in 1636 and let's say the privateering for Dutch and perhaps pirating. Cohen Henriquez assisted his brother Abraham Cohen in establishing the Kahal synagogue, Israel synagogue. It is perhaps one of the only synagogues that have been partially established by a pirate. From 1636 to 1654, the synagogue functioned on the site of the house of number 197 and 203, Rua do Bon Jews. At that point in time, the street of the Jews. It flourished in the mid-17th century when the Dutch Brazil controlled this part of northeastern Brazil. The synagogue then served a community of approximately 1,450 Jews at the cantor, the famous Josue Velocino, and there was a rabbi of there, famous rabbi we've spoken about on the series, Rabbi Isaac Aboabda Fonseca, who was sent to Recife, I think in 1642. In 1654, the Dutch surrendered to the Portuguese. Only after the Jews over that stage in time surrendered to the Portuguese, only after the Jews were guaranteed safe passage from the colony, evading Portuguese persecution. Rabbi Aboab de Fusquena and Cohen Henriquez, as well as most of the Jews of the Dutch colony, would actually leave at that stage in time. That was what was reported over. That's what we have to state out. Okay, so let's talk a bit more about the synagogue. The original synagogue structure survived until the early 20th century, when it was torn down, and the site had been confirmed by an archaeological excavation. Come 2001, the decision was made to create a Jewish museum in the two-story house. Let's say with two shops located on the first floor, then standing on the site of the old synagogue. Let's speak about present day of the synagogue itself, respectively. I think from a present day point of view, the Jewish museum, designed to resemble synagogues built in the 17th and 18th centuries by Sephardic Jews from Spain and Portugal, opened in 2001. Today, there are 4 synagogues in Recife. Many Jews choose to celebrate their weddings and B'nai Mitzvot celebrations in the Kahal Israel because of the symbolism as a connection to their long history inside the country. The synagogue is also at a center of broader cultural renaissance. Every November, a Jewish festival offering dance, cinema and food from a gefilte fish to Fluden attracts 20,000 visitors to the synagogue. And the Rua de Bom Jesus in of itself, respectively. So very, very interesting. You can see we're exploring the rich heritage over here of Brazilian Jewry over here. Now, friends, anyone tuning in on this live video, we're exploring the history of the Brazilian Jewish community. So please, if you're new to the channel, subscribe to the channel now. Please subscribe and join a fantastic channel over here of loads of things. Let's speak about Moses Cohen Henriquez. He was born in the year 1595. As a boy, he was a Dutch pirate of Portuguese Sephardic Jewish tradition. He was much can be said with regards to him. He was operating in a pirate in the Caribbean, and the total haul of his raids on Spanish is estimated to be $1 billion. He was born in the late 16th century to a Portuguese conversos family. Jews that had gone forced conversion to Catholicism during the Portuguese Inquisition. Let's say to escape religious persecution, his family immigrated at a certain stage to Amsterdam, whereupon they returned to practicing the Jewish faith. That's what's reported over with in regards to him. So he is, much can be said within regards to him. I think he served under Dutch naval officer and folk hero Admiral Pietersen Heine of the Dutch West India Company, rising to the ranks to become his right-hand man. He aided in the capture of Spanish treasure fleet in the Battle of Bay Matanzas of the Cuban coast during the 80 years of war in 1628. Part of the Spanish fleet in Venezuela had been warned because a Dutch cabin boy had lost his way on the Blanquilla Island and was captured, betraying the plan. But the other half from Mexico continued its voyage, unaware of the threat. 16 Spanish ships were intercepted. One galleon was taken after a surprise, encounter during the night, and 9 smaller merchants were, talked into a surrender. The 2 small ships were taken at sea fleeing, let's say at that point in time, and 4 fleeing galleons were trapped on the Cuban coast in the Bay of the Matanzas. After some musket volleys from Dutch sloops, let's just say, their crew surrendered, and that, you can see what's actually occurred over here. We're going to real Jewish history over here. Those ships would surrender at that point in time, and so that was very, very interesting. After some musket volleys from Dutch sloops, their crew surrendered, and the Dutch captured 11,509,524 Dutch, let's say, guilders of booty in gold, silver, expensive trade goods such as indigo, and also many other things. Also, so it's I was going to think the history of Brazilian oil. Yeah. So that's very, very interesting. So just recording this. Anyone joining in on this live video, we're doing a historic video of the Brazilian Jewish community over here on this special edition of here. So anyone that's new to the channel, please subscribe now to the channel and join our community. We've got some fantastic content over here. So please join over here. So very historic video on Brazil, on the Jewish community itself. Let's talk a bit about the Dutch colony in Brazil, respectively, of their point in time. Now, over here now, after, let's say, the war at that stage in time, Henriquez, a scout of the Portuguese colony of, I think the name was Pernambuco on the Brazilian coast, he did this as a spy in preparation for a Dutch invasion. Henriquez then went on to lead a Jewish contingent in Brazil as part of the Dutch invasion in 1630. He led a force of 3,000 men, capturing the colony and turning it into a refugee for Jews during subsequent Dutch rule. That's what's actually reported over within regards to him. Very, very interesting. He was apparently the uncle of someone named Jacob Cohen. Who was Jacob Cohen? I think he was a financial advisor and personal secretary to Count Maurice of Nassau. And on the 9th of February in 1634, he wrote a letter to the Dutch West India Company in Amsterdam. He would apply for permission to bring the first large organized group of Sephardi colonists to the Dutch colony in Brazil. The group arrived in 1635 and would settle in an area called Vila Velha on the island of Itamaraca. Now, Henriquez was instrumental in bringing a rabbi to the Dutch colony, a rabbi we've spoken about in this series before, Rabbi Isaac Aboab de Fonseca, as well as building a ritual bath, a mikveh, and a synagogue, the Kahal Sur Yisrael synagogue in Reside. All firsts, they have to say, for the New World this happened to be. However, in 1654, the Portuguese recaptured the Naissance colony in northern coast of Brazil, forcing Henrique and other Jews to flee from religious persecution. Rabbi Aboab then returned to Amsterdam, but I think members at that point of his community immigrated to North America and were among the founders of New Amsterdam, the Dutch settlement, and the southern tip of Manhattan. In 1655, Jacob Cohen actually lived in Manhattan, respectively. So that's very, very interesting. Piracy. After the Portuguese Empire's recapture of northern Brazil in 1654, Moses Cohen Henriquez fled South America. In order to survive difficult times, he ended up as a trusted advisor to someone named Henry Morgan, the leading pirate at that time. He established his own pirate island off the Brazilian coast in order to take revenge against the Spanish and Portuguese. Even though his role as a pirate was disclosed during the Portuguese Inquisition, Spanish Inquisition, as he was active in the Caribbean against Spain and Brazil against Portugal, Moses Cohen Henriquez was never caught and never faced trial. After the English conquest of Jamaica, Henriquez migrated to the island, where he helped the now established Jewish community in Jamaica also. Morgan, who became the governor of Jamaica, gave Henriquez a full pardon in the year 1681. So really going into proper Brazil history over here. Now let's speak about the famous Rabbi Isaac Aboab de Fonseca. He lived between February 1st, 1605. He passed away in 1693 on April the 4th. He was a rabbi, he was a great scholar, he was a Kabbalist, he was a writer also, and he was one of several elders of Portuguese Jewish community in Amsterdam and for a time in Dutch Brazil before the Portuguese reconquest. He was one of the religious leaders who famously excommunicated the philosopher Baruch Spinoza in 1656, which is a very, very interesting fact within regards to him. He had famous children, including Judith Abuab da Fonseca, and one of his children was Rabbi David Abuab da Fonseca, also another famous person. His parents happened to have been David Abuab and Isabel da Fonseca, respectively, over there. He would become the rabbi of the Kehillat Yisrael synagogue, arguably one of the most famous synagogues in South America, without a doubt. So he was born in the Abuab family in the Portuguese town of Castro Daire. His family and parents were conversos, Jews that had been forcibly converted to Christianity. Although the family had ostensibly converted to Christianity, this did not put an end to local anti-Semitic suspicions. In 1581, the Dutch Republic succeeded from the Spanish Empire. This caused significant immigration of Sephardic Jews to the Netherlands. In 1603, it was made legal in Amsterdam to then practice Judaism at that stage in time. And that was a key time period. So that was an important point in time. In 1612, when Rabbi Isaac was 7, the family moved to Amsterdam. From that moment on, the family reconverted back to Judaism, and Isaac was raised as a Jew from that moment on, together with another famous rabbi we've spoken about, Rabbi Menashe ben Israel. He studied under the great scholar, a doctor, a poet, and mathematician, Rabbi Isaac Uziel. Now, Rabbi Isaac Uziel would open a Talmudic school of his own. Now, Rabbi Abuab and Ben Israel, let's say, would debate in 1629 about writings by someone named Joseph Solomon del Medigo. Let's just say in of itself. So there will be that famous debate at that stage in time. That's something we have to point out. At the age of 18, Rabbi Isaac was appointed a Chacham for the Bet Israel, rabbi over there naturally, one of the Sephardic communities in Amsterdam, which later merged. In order to be distinguished from his cousin, there was another rabbi, Isaac ben Matitya Abuab. He added his mother's last name there, Fonseca, as his own name. Now, we've spoken about that before. Now, come on the year 1642. Rabbi Abuab de Fonseca was invited by Moses Cohen Henriquez, who we mentioned about before, appointed him the rabbi of the Kehillat Israel synagogue in Recife, in Pernambuco, Dutch Brazil, and Portuguese Jews from Amsterdam were a significant segment of the European population there. Many first immigrated to Amsterdam, and then later on, due to the persecution by Portuguese Inquisition and opportunities, let's say, to pursue commerce in the Atlantic world, by becoming the rabbi of the Portuguese community in Recife, Rabbi Abuab de Fonseca was also probably one of the first appointed rabbis of Americas, along with his rabbinic companion, Rabbi Moshe Raphael de Egula. And the Kehillat Yisrael synagogue had a synagogue, a mikveh, and a yeshiva, as well as one of the first in the New World. Very, very interesting. And as we mentioned before, Rabbi Fonseca's tenure as a rabbi of there in Pernambuco, the Portuguese would attack the Dutch colony at that point in time, which would be a major event that occurred over there. So, which is very, very interesting. We could actually say more about that over there. You could see what really was established at that point in time, at that window of time. The Portuguese who were, let's just say, animated in part of the Jesuit priests who said have their open synagogues there to the scandal of Christianity, calling for the reconquest of the colony and the destruction of the Jews. The Portuguese would reoccupy, I think the capital of Recife in 1654, and then there was a struggle for as many as 9 years. The Jews fought alongside the Dutch army, which refused to surrender until the Portuguese guaranteed they would surrender, allow a safe passage for the Jews at that point in time. Rabbi Abuab then would return to Amsterdam. Some members of the community immigrated to North America and were among the founders of the new Amsterdam, respectively. So you can see how things did evolve at that point in time. Let's just say a bit more about Rabbi Abuab. In Amsterdam, Rabbi Abuab de Fonseca was appointed chief rabbi for the Sephardic community. In 1656, he excommunicated Boris Spinoza over there, and he was the first student in the yeshiva, and I think he had discussions with Rabbi Saul Levi Mortiera, Rabbi Menashe, and Rabbi Abuab would oversee. He had, let's say, it was Kabbalist, I believe, also, and very, very interesting. I think that was a point of time when Shabtai Tzvi was about. So I think at that point in time, it says actually over here, quoting Wikipedia over here as a source. I recommend everyone to look at this. Like many people there were at that point in time, he was one of many fervent Sephardic supporters in Amsterdam, 1665, 1666, of the Shabtai Tzvi originally, until obviously the apostasy of Shabtai in September 1666. Now we're talking about the Shabtai Tzvi, the false Messiah, on many occasions before, and the horrors that actually occurred at that point in time about him. And unfortunately, there were followers originally towards him, but many would denounce him later on. But we've spoken about it in the videos of many of the rabbis. Now, during the tenure of Rabbi Abu Abdeh, therefore, the Sephardic community will flourish. The construction of the new Portuguese synagogue, the Esnoga, was prompted by a sermon delivered by him in 1671. It was inaugurated less than 4 years later, and he died in Amsterdam at the age of 88 in 1693. Okay, so we're going on a bit of a tangent. We're exploring. He wrote great works also. Many of it was translated from Spanish into Hebrew. I think the works of Kabbalist Rabbi Abraham Cohen de Herrera, for example, and there's various legacies in memory of him. I think in Jerusalem, the Institute Machon Yerushalayim in Israel published a book about Rav Foseska's works and various other importances, let's say, in itself. So let's go. Yes, that's very, very interesting. So exploring the history over there of Rabbi Abu Ab over here, in the special edition over here. Anyone that's tuning in at the moment to this live channel, we're exploring the history of the Jewish community of Brazil. Let's speak a bit more about the synagogues in Brazil at the moment, while we're all here. There's a famous Beit Yaakov Rabbi Meir synagogue. This was, I think, a traditional synagogue located in Manaus, Amazonas in Brazil. I think it would later be a merger of two earlier congregations from the 1920s. It's known as one of the most largest and influential congregations in northern Brazil. Interesting enough, the current synagogue, I believe, was completed in 1962. I think it follows Spanish Moroccan heritage in itself. This synagogue does, and I think it's about 1,400 kilometers inland from the Atlantic Ocean, in the capital of the state of the Amazonas, where I think, as of 2006, there was only about 850 Jews, and I think, according to someone, Isaac DeHaan, he was he's local synagogue's cantor, the chazan over there. And now the Jewish community of Manaus actually dates back from 1890, when Jews fleeing poverty and uncertain life in Morocco, and when Brazil was expecting a rubber boom, the smuggling of seeds for rubber trees out of Brazil to England in 1876, and successful planting of seedlings in Indonesia and Kowloon eventually helped cause a bubble to burst. The Jewish community of the Amazonas was established on June the 15th, 1929, by which time the first local synagogue, the Beit Yaakov at that point in time, over there, would actually be, let's just say, already be operating since 1925. Now, subsequently, the Rabbi Meir synagogue was founded in 1937. These two synagogues merged into one large synagogue in 1962 in January. During the 1960s, there was a new wave of migration to Manaus, formed mainly by Jewish businessmen in southern Brazil and Jewish communities in Latin America. The construction of the current synagogue was in 1962. Let's just say it was financed by local entrepreneurs Isaac Ben Yon Saba and Samuel Ben Shimon, who we spoke about before, Jose Ben Sekrai, and Moises Ben Ras Israel. The synagogue is locally referred to as a esnoga, derived from Ladino, the term for synagogue. And yeah, very, very interesting. I think parts of the community was a Jewish youth movement, Habonim Draw, we have to point out also. More Labour Zionistic youth movement would be connected over there. Let's say a bit about one of the philanthropists that opened the synagogue in 1962. Isaac Benayun Saba. Who was he? He lived between 1907 to 1996. He lived about 89 years. Passed away actually March 22nd, 1996. He was a Brazilian entrepreneur. He founded the IB Saba LTDA group and the Petrola Saba, largest business group operating on the Brazilian Amazon region during the 20th century. He got married to Irene, I think, in the year 1942. They would have 5 children. He was born into a Jewish family from Moroccan origin. He was his 3rd son among 5 children of Primo Saba and Fortunata Saba. His father was a son of Moroccan immigrants born in Cameta, when it was capital of the state of Para. His mother was born in Faro in Portugal. He's a descendant of a Spanish Rabbi Abraham Saba. We'll speak about him in a minute. His family moved to Manuas for his older sister's wedding because his future brother-in-law had offered employment when he was 12. Soon he would begin working as an office assistant, and then would progress his life would be, I think, would be very much into reading. His career would really, let's just say, establish and take off at that point in time, and become a famous philanthropist, and he's one of the most successful businesses in South America, without a doubt, over there. So, very, very interesting. So, so very interesting over there. I think let's speak a bit about he came from great heritage. His grandfather was a rabbi named Rabbi Abraham Saba, who lived between all the way back to 1440 to 1508. So it wasn't his grandfather. He was an ancestor, great grandfather. Like his great grandfather, Rabbi Abraham Saba lived between 1440 to 1508. He was a rabbi in Castile. He was a Talmid of Rabbi Isaac de Leon. And at the time of the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, he took refuge in Portugal, where he met, and let's say, I think at that time he was very, very famous. And unfortunately, I think two of his sons were forcibly taken from him, and he fled from Porto, abandoning. He had a rich library at that point in time. And much can be said about his ancestor over there. Let's speak about another synagogue, the Bet El Synagogue in Sao Paulo. Anyone that's tuning in at the moment, please. We're exploring the history of the Brazilian Jewish community, so please subscribe to the channel, friends, over here. Now, the Bet El Synagogue, I think, once again, one Orthodox channel, but I think it's a famous synagogue that's associated to the Reform community over there. I think it was built in 1929, and I think it's the first synagogue building in Sao Paulo, respectively, over here. And was organized by Salomon Klabin, and I think the synagogue itself has 7 sides to it. It's an Ashkenazic synagogue. I think currently now there's a Jewish museum since 2021 over there, respectively. There's another synagogue that's also associated to the Reform movement, the Sao Paulo Hebrew Congregation, or Congregacja Israelita Palto. And I think it's the largest congregation in Latin America, serving 2,000 families, and it was established in 1936 by refugees from Nazi Germany, I think, at that point in time. I think it's got ties connected to the conservative movement. Another synagogue, the Centro Israelita do Parana, which is now currently a Jewish cultural center and possibly also connected to conservative movements. I think it's also called the Beit Yaakov Synagogue, as we mentioned before. And I think it's got communal space. It houses a synagogue, Jewish day school, and a Holocaust museum. That's another place. Now, another place, the Tiferet Israel Synagogue, I think, which was built in 1928. This happens to be the oldest synagogue in Rio de Janeiro, and was for several decades the center of Jewish life in Nilópolis, respectively. And it's an emblem, let's just say, of Brazilian Jewish heritage. It serves, let's say, as a living monument to Jewish refugees who moved to Nilópolis from Eastern Europe during the first half of the 20th century. And let's say, remaining a Jewish population. The synagogue is a community center also, respectively, over here. Let's speak a bit more about going back to the Portuguese discovery between 1492 to 1624. Just going back to the history, now using the Aish website over here. And they say the Portuguese monarchy told someone named Pedro Álvares Cabral in the year 1500 to take his ships as far west as he could to see if he could find an alternative route to India. Accompanying him was someone named Cabral. He was an interpreter, was a Jewish person, Gaspar de Gama, who we mentioned that before. And there was Vasco da Gama was shocked to find, let's say, a white man serving as an advisor to one of the local rulers. Vasco da Gama decided that he could use someone who spoke Eastern languages. So he decided to take this man back with him to Lisbon and adopt the name Gaspar da Gama as an explorer, let's just say, in defense to the explorer. After discovering Brazil, the Portuguese settlers moved westward, hoping to discover gold and silver and extend their landmass. They were known as Bandeirantes because they carried bandeira, a flag, with them. Based on the names, records suggest that many of them were conversos, hidden Jews, at that point in time. One of the most important Benedirientes was Fernando de Noronha. He was a Portuguese conversus with many contacts in Lisbon at that point in time. He convinced the crown to lease him land and that he would give them in exchange a wood named pau Brazil that provided a dye and other precious items he would find. The wood that he sent gave the land the name Brazil. Very interesting enough, so that's how the name came about. Now, in 1600, the Dutch East Indies Company that imported spices and exotic, let's say, products from the Far East was highly successful. So the Dutch decided to create a West Indies Company, let's say a company that would import natural resources from New York, the Caribbean islands and Brazil. It was a major producer in sugar. The Dutch defeated the Portuguese in northeastern Brazil and began to establish a Dutch settlement there called New Holland. The Dutch allowed religious freedom in New Holland. As a result, many Portuguese conversos who lived in the Portuguese-controlled area would now be able to become Jewish, let's say practice their Judaism openly again. The Jews established a variety of businesses in New Holland and were involved in the development of Brazil's sugar industry, like we said before. Yet for years, Dutch settlement prospered over there, but then the West Indies Company began to lose interest in the colony as the profits were less than other areas under its control. The Portuguese successfully drove the Dutch out of Brazil in 1654, following a 9-year war. In the Treaty of Guarapes, the Portuguese promised to respect the religious freedom of those who chose to remain in Brazil under Portuguese control. However, in the coming years, the Portuguese went back on their word and accused the Jews of heresy and persecuted them. And now the Inquisition in Brazil. Despite the Jews' hope, let's say, that distance would protect them from long arm of the Inquisition, Portuguese persecution followed them to the New World. In 1647, Isaac de Castro was arrested for teaching Judaism in Portuguese-controlled Brazil. He was deported to Portugal, where the Inquisition sentenced him to death and burned him at the stake. Recognizing the danger, Jews hid their Jewish identities, immigrated Dutch-controlled areas, or moved to the interior of Brazil, where there was less overnight. Now, historians, let's say, recently came across populations in Brazil's interior that seemingly had Jewish practices. These groups, let's say, can't explain why they light candles on Friday, read the Bible itself, do not eat non-kosher foods, and refrain from eating bread, let's say, on Pesach. So that's very interesting. One of the famous cases regarding the Inquisition in Brazil was Antonio José da Silva. Who was he? Da Silva was a law student living in Rio de Janeiro, and he also wrote several successful plays. He was denounced to the Inquisition and arrested and sent to Portugal. He refused to recant and was burned to the stake in October 19, 1739. His courage inspired Jewish and non-Jewish Brazilians. In 1996, his story was made into the Brazilian film O Judeo, the Jew, over there. Now let's talk a bit more about later period, 1822. This was after Brazil gained its official independence from Portugal. Moroccan Jews began to move to Brazil. In 1824, they founded a synagogue in Belém, northern Brazil. This was called the Porta de Kibble, the Gate of Heaven. Now, by World War I, the Sephardic community of Belém, composed primarily of Moroccans, let's say they approximately had 800 members. In the 1950s, an additional wave of Jewish immigration brought more than 3,500 Jews to Brazil. That saved in time a lot of Ashkenazi European Jews began to arrive in Brazil in 1850. Brazil was not the preferred destination of European Jews seeking a new life in South America. Jewish and non-Jewish Europeans tend to prefer, let's say, Argentina more. At the beginning of the 20th century, Argentina had one of the highest standards of living in the world. Possible that immigrants who chose Brazil did so because the fare was far less than traveling by boat to Buenos Aires, which was, I think, 1,500 miles to the south. Now, about 30,000 Western European Jews, mainly from Germany, came to Brazil in the 1920s to escape European anti-Semitism. By the year 1929, they had established communities to the extent that there were 27 Jewish schools over there at that point in time. Now let's talk about modern-day Brazilian Jewish community. Today it's let's say, either the 9th or 10th largest Jewish population in the entire world, I think, and it's only behind Argentina as before, population size. So there's varying. Some say 100,000 Jews, 130,000 Jews, and they're distributed all over the country. Most of the people are in Sao Paulo, the majority, I believe, are. And it's actually interesting. The Sao Paulo Jews, one of the things they're most proud about is the Hospital Israel to Albert Einstein, which we spoke about before. It was the first hospital outside the United States to be accredited by the Joint Commission. Now, in present-day Brazil, the Jewish community lives in peace and stability, able to practice their religion freely. And the main threat to Brazil at the moment is intermarriage and assimilation. Now, it's actually interesting. I think one of the head rabbis in Brazil is someone named Rabbi Disraeli Zaguri. Currently, most famously, I think recently, in 2021, the Rishon LeZion of Israel, of the chief rabbi of Jerusalem, Rabbi Shlomo Amar, would actually come to Brazil and actually visit over there, respectively, which is very interesting. Now, Rabbi Disraeli Zaguri is, I think, the rabbi of the community of Belém in Brazil, and they will have a famous encounter over there. This community in Belém is mostly Moroccan Jews, let's just say itself. And it's interesting, the chief rabbi, Rabbi Amar, actually comes from Moroccan descent. Now, the community, as we said before, in Belém, goes back to 1840, when the first Moroccan expats moved there. They settled, let's say, around the Amazon River and founded a community with synagogues and charitable institutions. The family names of the Jews in Belém are like any other Moroccan community, like Ben Zekri, Ben Moyal, which I mentioned about before, Ben Shimon, Atiyah, Saruya. For 180 years, let's say, Judaism was kept alive. Unfortunately, there was also those people that assimilated. And I think Rabbi Disraeli Zaguri moved to Belém, I think back in the year 1991, over there. And the community itself say that Rabbi Zaguri was a true hero and pillar of Moroccan Jewry in northern Brazil. He's known as to be not just a chazan, a cantor, a rabbi, an educator, teacher, a mohel, a rabbi that performs circumcision, also a kosher slaughterer, a shochet, and leads the Chevra Kedisha over there. And really did huge amounts. And because of that, many of the congregation buy kosher meat. There's kosher meat options over there. And very much connected to Sao Paulo and Rio. I think there's yeshivot in two large cities. Have brought many students from Belém, respectively. And much of this is thanks to Rabbi Zaguri. And they've got a son also, Rabbi Shlomo Zaguri also. And the son-in-law happens to be Rabbi Ari Richmond, who lives in Manaus, I believe also. So many of them, so all these works have really inspired Jews in North Brazil, let's just say, educational institutions, and so on and so forth. So very important, the great work they do. And so that's very interesting over there. So you can see the life. So just greatness in Brazil. You know, they've had many, I think, rabbis of communities. I think more recent years. I think Belém, for example, there's Rabbi Yaakov Saruya. Also in Beryl, there's another rabbi currently, Rabbi Moshe El Miskani. He's another rabbi. Another rabbi in Rio de Janeiro is Rabbi Yitzchak Levi. In Sao Paulo, there's Rabbi Shmuel Franquis. In Sao Paulo, there's another rabbi, Rabbi Eli Leon Barry. In Sao Paulo, there's another rabbi, Rabbi Daniel Mizrahi. Another one in Sao Paulo is Rabbi Shlomo Yaakov Surya. Another rabbi is Rabbi Shlomo Safra in Sao Paulo. Rabbi Semi Pinto is Rabbi Dan, and Rabbi Aaron Zaguri in Sao Paulo also, respectively. Very interesting. Now, a famous rabbi that was made his mark in Brazil was Rabbi Menachem Mendel Dias Drunk. He was actually from the small town of Eastern Galicia originally, and he would arrive in Sao Paulo in the year 1952, respectively. He was so he was involved. His rabbinical training had vast amount of Jewish and secular knowledge, which would help him in his professional path. And his final role was in Brazil as a rabbi of the Congresso e Beneficência over there. So he was, I think his last role of Brazil was that congregation where he worked from 1964 to 1974 and then eventually passed away. Earlier on in his life, he played an important role in the Jewish community of Portugal in the first half of the 20th century. From 1920s to 1930s, two new segments joined the veteran community of predominantly Moroccan origin, descendants of Anosim, who had undergone at one point in time a conversion to Judaism. And Ashkenazi Jews immigrated from Poland, and Romania would speak Yiddish later on, let's just say. And obviously, the Second World War would have a huge impact of Jewish refugees that would find temporary shelter in Portugal. And the ultimate goal of that point in time was leaving Europe to restart their lives on other continents. In 22 years, he would work in Lisbon between 1930 to 1952. He witnessed social, culture change and demographic change of the ancient and small Jewish community. Very interesting enough. So he gained a lot of respect in the community and the authorities and intellectuals and Portuguese society. And in 1931, after he settled in Lisbon, he was granted special license by the Portuguese government to research the Torre de Tombo archives relating to histories of the Jews in Portugal, at a time when consultation of these archives was not yet permitted to the general public. He achieved this privilege, the result of his vast knowledge of the Hebrew and biblical languages, let's just say, in of itself. So he was very well known. He published a series of studies, including Judaism and music in 1937, and the Sephardic Qoblas in 1938. During the Second World War was a turbulent time, and he had the son Elchanan, who was also someone famous. We'll actually speak a lot about his father, also respectively. And during the Second World War, the rabbi helped Zionistic and Jewish organizations seeking refuges for Jews. Still during the war, together with his wife, he sent packages of supplies to regions conquered by Germans in South France and Eastern Europe. However, it's not known whether the packages actually reached their recipients at that point in time. He would actually go to Brazil. I think he was invited to Brazil, and by the community in Sao Paulo, where he served as a director of the Colegio Beit Chinuch and the Ginásio Laven. In 1964, he was invited to serve as rabbi of the Congregação Beneficia Sephardi Paulista Beit Yaakov. He would remain there until he passed away in 1974, he was brought over. And before he came to Beit Yaakov, he gave a speech at that point in time, and would choose, and would, very interesting, famous speech he would actually give over at that point in time, which we spoke about Brazil. In Brazil, due to his his experience in helping refugees, he became involved with entities that served newly arrived Jews, mainly from Arab countries. Many of them had to leave their homelands throughout the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. He was the head of the Beit Yaakov synagogue, and the rabbi had a strong presence in the Brazilian Jewish community and in the Zionistic movement. He was a member of several councils over there, among others of the Israeli Confederation of Brazil, the Brazilian Zionistic Organization. He was a vice president of Histadrut for several years, the Israeli Federation of the State of Sao Paulo, and the Mizrahi movement. In recognition of his services provided in his public activity, in December 1963, he received the title of Citizen of Holistano and represented by the Sao Paulo City Council, respectively. He published several articles on Jewish topics in national and international journalists, let's just say, and gave lectures in various forums in the areas of ethics, philosophy, and Jewish literature over there. And shortly before his death, he completed his books of sermons on the weekly Torah portions for the Shabbat, the Parshat Shavua of the Torah, published in Portuguese in 1977 under the title, actually named Sermons at that stage in time. There's something else that we must point out about him. And we'll have different studies in different themes. Now, that's very important. So now another rabbi that's currently a rabbi in Brazil is someone named Rabbi Daniel Mizrahi. I think he's connected to the Sephardic Sheba Center, respectively the Midrash Sephard Rabbinic program. He was actually a graduate from this program 25 years ago in the year 2000, and was the first rabbi in Uruguay in 2001 at the Congregation Sephardi. He would then go to Brazil, where now he works in the Yavne school in Brazil, and is currently working on writing books on Parshat Shavua, the weekly portion, and on education, respectively. So that's very interesting. Another rabbi, I think more in the progressive field in Brazil, is someone named Rabbi Gershon Wojciechowski, who actually currently leads a Brazilian Jewish culture and beneficial society. I think since 1996, he's been there nearly 30 years, if I'm not mistaken. So that's another interesting. Another rabbi in Brazil, famous rabbi, is Rabbi Gilberto Emmanuel Ventura. He was born in Sao Paulo in Brazil. He was brought up in a Jewish home, influenced by previous generations. He was really into Judaism with a penchant for Jewish studies. Eventually, he led his ordination to become a rabbi. Along the way, Rabbi Ventura learned of his historical Jewish connection to the origins of Brazil, and the fact that was, let's say, he was a proud Jewish person, also a proud Brazilian, you have to point out. Now armed with this compelling information, Rabbi Ventura set out on a mission, let's say, to disseminate the impactful discovery with the hope of creating positive influence on Jewish communities. And he had great aspiration all throughout his time, was that this newfound reality would also act as combat anti-Semitism wherever it may reside. He started a quest and humble beginnings. He would start as a teacher in Jewish schools, Jewish clubs, and in synagogues where he worked. And then Rabbi Ventura was introduced to the fact that millions of Brazils were descendants, let's say, conversos, respectively, at that point now. Moreover, many of these conversos were aware of their Jewish heritage, and many had been engaged, let's say, in Jewish ceremonial practices. And these descendants, or the forced conversos, had been left to fend for themselves for over 500 years with no guidance. And he had great knowledge, so he would use his knowledge, Rabbi Ventura, together with his wife and children, begin visiting communities in the state of Rio Grande do Norte, situated along northeast Brazil, reported over. So he would help at the converso, or B'nai Anusim, and within regards to Judaism over there, let's just state that point in time. And I'm not too sure about, let's say, if they were halakhically Jewish or not. That's another topic into himself. He would do dozens of trips across the vast land of Brazil to locales of these Jewish outposts over there. He would teach Torah, Hebrew, Jewish practices, values, Jewish history, and Zionism. And his visits, I think sometimes, were accompanied by leading rabbinical authorities from Israel and elsewhere, and really had pride at that point in time. And really, very, very interesting. So we can talk about them. Let's talk a bit more about the old Dutch Brazil Jewish history, as we just go back a little bit again to the history part. In Dutch Brazil, we're just going back, Jews flourished in the sugar industry, as we said before. They were also flourishing in the tax farming and slave trade, I believe. Jews often purchased slaves, as was reported over from the Jewish Virtual Library over here, and resold them at a great profit. Those, let's say, they kept often preferred to work for Jews because both Shabbat and Sunday were rest days, whereas the Portuguese only gave them Sunday off. The Dutch worked for their slaves 7 days a week. In 1642, we mentioned about Rabbi Isaac Aboab de Fonseca, who would become the rabbi later on of that congregation in the famous congregation in Brazil. Also, there was great Rabbi Moses Rafael de Iguala came to Brazil, and they were the spiritual leaders of it. At that point in time, there was 1,500 Jewish population, I think, of the Dutch population over there, respectively. And it's interesting, they also had Talmud Torah, a school, and a tzedakah fund, also at that point a charity fund. At that point in time, in 1647, the authorities arrested, as I said, Isaac de Castro for teaching Jewish rites and customs in Portuguese-controlled Brazil, and sent him back to Portugal, where the Inquisition sentenced him to death, as we said before. And the Portuguese would also start a 9-year war that successfully drove the Dutch out of Brazil. This was in 1654. So we talked about how that it was those Portuguese anti-Jewish persecution led to mass immigration to places like Curaçao and New York, where they laid the foundations for new Jewish communities, while others returned to Europe. Most of whom could not escape were killed, unfortunately, but some became crypto-Jews, practicing Judaism in secret, as we stated about before. In 1655, the Portuguese closed the major, let's say, symbol of Brazilian Jewry, the Cahal synagogue. However, thanks to the Safra banking family, the synagogue reopened in 2002 and now stands as oldest existing synagogue in Americas, housing a cultural center and hosting religious ceremonies over there. Friends, anyone coming new to the channel over watching this live, we're community, please subscribe to the channel. We've got fantastic content over here. Let's speak a bit more about 1773 to 1916. In 1773, a Portuguese royal decree finally abolished discrimination against Jews. They slowly filtered back into Brazil. Almost 50 years later, in 1822, Brazil gained independence from Portugal, and a stream of Moroccan Jews began arriving and set up a synagogue in Belém, which we mentioned before, called the Porta de Quio, the Gates of Heaven, which we mentioned about before. By World War I, Belém's Sephardi community of 800 people had its own charitable organization and a social club. Now, I think in the last decade, in the 19th century, European Jews began discussing the idea of establishing agricultural settlements in Brazil, and as an alternative to unfavorable conditions in Europe. After the 1891 expulsion of Jews from Moscow, a close associate of Theodor Herzl, Oswald Boxer, went to Brazil and returned with a positive report, but plans were abandoned because of Brazilian political strife. The first agricultural settlement was finally established in 1902 by the Jewish Colonization Association, the JCA, in Santa Maria area of southern Brazil. Despite 1903 pogrom in Bessarabia, only 39 Bessarabian families were willing to settle in the experimental colony, which covered 13,388 acres. The 1904 farming season failed because of inexperience, also insufficient funds, if I'm not mistaken, there was at that point in time. That's very, very interesting. So there was a whole history to making agricultural settlements, and this would be, I think, influenced very much because of the war going on at that point in time, Nazi Germany, and the settlers would abandon the colonies set up by rich cultural communities in Brazilian cities. By World War I, approximately 7,000 Jews lived in Brazil, in Porto Alegre, the capital of the southern state of Rio Grande do Sul, and the community opened a Jewish school in 1910, as we mentioned before, and it was a Yiddish newspaper called the Die Menschheit, Humanity, around that point in time, 1915. And we talked about what happened in 1915. Sao Paulo was home to several philanthropic and cultural associations. 1916, the Jewish community of Rio de Janeiro formed an aid committee for World War I victims. And I think come 1950s, waves of immigrants came, about 3,500 people, North African Jews, to Brazil. 1960s, Brazilian Jewry was then thriving. 1966, parliamentary elections, there were 6 Jewish people representing various parties, and they were elected to the federal legislature. In addition, Jews served in state legislatures and municipal councils. 1967, 33 Jewish schools were attended by more than 10,000 students. By 1969, approximately 140,000 Jewish people lived in the large cities, mostly in Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, as many as 55,000, Porto Alegre, Belo Horizonte, Recife and Belém. Jewish communal life was uneventful through the 1970s. There were some reports over anti-Semitic incidents over there. Also reported over. Friends, anyone joining in live to the channel, the history of the Brazilian Jewish community, please subscribe to our channel. Now we're a community here that's learning about great culture of the different countries of yesteryear. So please, everyone, join our community and subscribe now. Now, yeah, very, very interesting. I think Sao Paulo itself has a huge Jewish population over there. The synagogues, I think, include the Congregação Israel Paulista, which I mentioned about before. The primary Sephardic synagogues are Ohel Yaakov and the Beit Yaakov, which I mentioned about before. At Rua Hungary 1000, there's a 28,000 member Jewish club called Hebrakia, resembling, let's say, a self-contained city, complete with swimming pools, movie theatres, a ballroom, a synagogue, a bank, restaurants, and an art gallery. There's even a tiny Hasidic synagogue which still functions in an old Jewish neighborhood called Bom Retiro, or the Good Retreat, let's just say, northern Sao Paulo. But most of the Jews moved to other parts of the city, so I'm not sure how thriving this happens to be in of itself. I think in 2001, the synagogue in Recife, the first synagogue ever built in Americas, was reopened 347 years after it was closed over there. So we spoke about that before over there. The synagogue itself began to be used in the mid-16th, 17th century when the Portuguese defeated the Dutch and Recife expelled the estimated 1,200 Jews, banned Judaism at that point in time. Now, the Jewish Museum that's in Rio de Janeiro documents the history of Jews in Brazil and gives insight into the culture of the city's Jewish community. The area around Rua Alfândega is a center of Rio's, let's just say, old Jewish neighborhood. The congregation of Gran Templo Israelita is located at Rua Tenente Pozuelo number 8. And unfortunately, there's been some anti-Semitic incidents recently. I think in 2018, for example, in May, vandals would attack the Brazilian Israelite Society of Pilsen Synagogue, which was the vandals also scrawled pro-Palestinian anti-Semitic messages on the walls. In September 2020, Louis Fuchs was sworn as the first Jewish justice on Brazil's Supreme Court. Jewish groups filed a criminal complaint in March 2021 for the crime of racism against Roberto Jefferson, let's say a Christian politician over there also. And the other synagogues also at that point in time. Unfortunately, a struggle in the Brazilian Jewish community has been intermarriage over there. Let's talk about the relations they have with Israel. Also, that's another important thing. I think in 2006, the mayor of Sao Paulo declared her city a sister city with Tel Aviv. Mayor Marta Suplicy said the new status would strengthen ties between both Brazilians and Israelis. Suplicy, who had recently married a Jewish person, added that new status would be a kickoff for urban, cultural, scientific, tourist and economic programs over there. I think at that point in time, the Prime Minister and the acting Foreign Minister was Benjamin Netanyahu, would name Danny Dayan as ambassador to Brazil in August 2015. Dayan himself was born in Argentina, had connection, let's say, to Latin and South America. A statement from Netanyahu's office about the appointment of Dayan read that Latin America is one of Israel's key destinations as part of efforts to develop new markets that will contribute to increased economic growth in Israel. The number of Brazilian Jews making Aliyah to Israel more than doubled between 2011 and 2015. In 2015, 463 individuals immigrated to Israel from Brazil compared to only 191 in 2011 over there. So very interesting. So Revital Poleg, who happens to be the head of Jewish agency's delegation to Brazil, stated in November 2016 that the Jewish community is very Zionistic and very connected to Israel over there. Brazilian Jewish immigration to Israel only accelerated in 2016 with more than 700 individuals making Aliyah. So another famous rabbi from Brazil, let's speak about him also over here. Friends, anyone tuning in at the moment, we're exploring the history of Brazilian Jews. Someone of them, Rabbi Chaim Ben Yamini. He was a famous rabbi, lived between 1922 to 2021, passed away 3rd of November, or Chav Chetz Cheshvan, a few weeks' time, it's Hilula. He was a famous rabbi. He was a Shliach Chabad in Brazil, respectively, and was a Rosh Yeshiva of Or Etzion, I believe, also, and Rosh Yeshiva of Mechane Yisrael, I think the first yeshiva in Brazil this happened to have been, and I think it was connected to the Chabad Hasidut movement. Rabbi Chaim Ben Yamini was actually, as before, I think he was born actually in Hungary, if I'm not mistaken, in 1922. He would pass away in Israel. He's buried in Har Menachot, and he would make Aliyah eventually in the year Heita Shin Hey on Zayin Av. So he was a famous Rosh Yeshiva of Machane Yisrael in Brazil. He was also of great works, Yeshiva Shel Ma'ala Beirut, Brazil. He would write various different books, I think, including the Sifura Shel Yeshiva Machane Yisrael, the Potropolis, respectively. His rabbis include Rabbi Yitzhak Tzvi Hent, Rabbi Yosef Frankfurter, and Rabbi Milubavitcher Rebbe. Also, his wife was Rabbanit Rivka Benyamini from the Steinberg family, and his father was Rabbi Benjamin Zev Fisher, and very, very interesting. You'll have Chatans, including Rabbi Menachem Lera, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Feig Lustig, respectively, over there. Let's explore a bit about his life, because he was a key rabbi in Brazil. Rabbi Benyamini was born in Budapest, I think in 1922, and 1943 he'd become the Rabbi of Kartzeg, if I'm not mistaken, over there. And Sham Kihen Tkufa Ketzera Ad Shekvusha HaGermani, he was over there. He would become a rabbi over there, and who eventually, I think he would go to Paris, if I'm not mistaken. I think eventually Misham he would go to Eretz Israel in July 1944, a few years before the formation of Medinat Israel. In 1955, he was sent to Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and he'll become the rabbi over there in that specific place in itself. Sham Shimesh K'menahel Mostot Chinuch Toranim, he'll become the head of the education committee in Brazil over there, especially Beit Sefer called Bar Ilan in Brazil. Shalosh Shanim Shav Arza B'Yeshev Moshav Mosot Yitzhak, he'll return eventually to Israel, as he'll be working with regards to the Chassidut Chabad movement. Rabbi Nimi Haya, I think Yeshivat Or Yitzion, Shukma B'Shnat Tafshin in 1960 was actually formed, if I'm not mistaken, so it was connected to that yeshiva, and I think it was La'anat Sachat B'nei Gosh Yitzion, Shnaflu B'Mechmet Atmot, who Shemesh Rosh Yeshiva until 1963 will be the Rosh Yeshiva there. As Portem Mitzkudo, Akiv Krovo Lechassidut Chabad. It's called Rosh Yeshiva Mona Arab Chaim Drukman, I think Rob Chaim Drukman at that point in time will be Rosh Yeshiva. Who Nishlach B'Shanit Al Yedei HaSochnot K'Shliach HaMachloket Toranit. I think come on 1966 he would establish Yeshivat Machane Israel in Petropolios, I think, over there. That will be the first yeshiva in Brazil, and very, very interesting, very prominent position over there. And many of the rabbis in Kehillah will be connected to it, and he would have connection with especially the Lubavitcher Rebbe while he was over there at that point in time. And I think in his last years, in 2008, both him and his wife, Rabbanit Benyamini, would actually return finally to the land of Israel over there, and would settle in the Kfar Chabad village over there. It's reported over. And over there, I think his books would actually come out, the Yeshiva Shel Mala, I think that was in Brazil also, and Sifro Chayav, respectively. So he passed away, he was about 98 years of age. I was buried in the Haram Menuchot, if I'm not mistaken. Now, he had 3 children. His daughter, the oldest daughter, Rachel, would get married to Rav Menachem Lera, if I'm not mistaken, also connected to the Chabad movement. His other daughter, Rabbanit Sarah, would get married to Rav Yosef Feiglstock, who we mentioned about before, the rabbi of the Chabad Kehillah, and Shluach in Buenos Aires in Argentina. Like his son, Rav David Benjamin, who became the Rosh Yeshiva of Machane Yisrael Chabad of Petropolis in Brazil. And it's actually interesting, his brother-in-law is Rabbi Moshe Chaim Zaks and Dr. Lebotnakia Agronos. Very interesting enough. So that's, I think, working, if I'm not mistaken, connected to Shalavim, Moshav, the kibbutz, which we visited on this channel, also respectively. So that's something else that we've got to point out. So, yeah. So over here we're exploring just a bit about the history within regards to, the great rabbis of that point in time. We see what so much was actually established in Brazil of yesteryear at that stage in time. Okay, so we spoke about the rabbi himself, what an important role he will actually have to have over there. Anyone that's tuning in, we're exploring the history of the Brazilian Jewish community over here, but on this special edition here in Israel. Let's explore some of the other synagogues. There's just a list of synagogues in Brazil at the moment. Let's explore some of them. There's a famous Beit Knesset in Brazil. Obviously, we spoke about the Kahal Tzur Yisrael. There's also other synagogues in Sao Paulo, including the Beit Knesset Ashkenazi, Kehillat Mizrahi, Shel Harov Aaron Kindi. And then there's a Beit Knesset Chasidi of Rabbi Zusha, which is, I think, more probably a Hasidic synagogue. Beit Knesset Chasidi Chadash, and Rabbi Yitzhak David Horovitz. And then there's a Beit Knesset Chasidi, Rabbi Meir Avram Alevosht. And then the Beit Knesset Sahach, Agudat Chabad, which is of Rabbi Label Zentz, if I'm not mistaken. Another synagogue. Beit Knesset Bnei Akiva in the Zardin area. Beit Knesset Avi Yaakov of Rabbi Ari Friedman, if I'm not mistaken. Beit Knesset Kiruv Achim of Kehillat Yismach Moshe, I think of Rav Reuven Nata Zilberstein. Beit Knesset Sephardi Beit Yaakov, which is very much connected, I believe, to the Beit Yaakov is, I think, to I've got to double check over there. Maybe Rabbi Harabanim David Wittman and Rabbi Ephraim Laniado, Rabbi Avram Cohen, Shlomo, if I'm not mistaken. And then there's Beit Knesset Sfardim called the Makor Chaim of Rabbi Yitzchak Dishi Bezo Dishi, and Beit Knesset Tver Lebavitch, which is of Rabbi Shammai and Nada, if I'm not mistaken. And Beit Knesset Ashkenazi, Knesset Yisrael, also Rabbi Mortal Milabani, and Beit Knesset Sfardi Montasini of Rabbi David, if I'm not mistaken, Azulay, and Beit Knesset Chaim Menachem of Rabbi Yerchmiel Belinov and Rabbi Menachem Shimonovitz, I think, respectively, in another area in itself. There's also youth movements in Brazil, especially Bnei Akiva, which started, I think, in the year 1945, and it takes place they have activities in 3 cities, Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and Belém also. They're about 250 members, and they do various different camps, I think, in summer and winter, respectively, over there. So that's very, very interesting. And I think it's actually the world contact person of Bnei Akiva is someone named Uriel Ederi at the moment, currently. Also, so that's another interesting thing. So we've spoken about over here on this special edition about the Brazilian Jewish history over there. Let's just recap a bit over here as we just continue. Anyone tuning in at the moment, please subscribe to the channel. We are nearing a staggering 7,500 subscribers, so please join our community and subscribe. So we spoke about how there was a Dutch occupation of Brazil between 1630 to 1654. We talked about how there was about 1,450 Jewish people living in Brazil in, I think it was back in the year 1644. We talked about the Kahal Kadosh Sur Yisrael, the Rock of Israel, and the country's first Jewish cemetery was established in 1848 in Manaus. We spoke about that also. I'm just going to go to just a slightly quieter location as we progress this video over there. We spoke about how there was an influx of Moroccan Jewish people that came, I think, moved to the Amazon because of the rubber boom. Rabbinical authorities, actually, I think in Morocco, saw the need for the community to have some form of religious leadership. And I think they would send a rabbi to Amazon at that point in time and bring about funds. Also, that's something important we have to speak about. Now, there's another key rabbi, I think, someone named Rabbi Shalom Emmanuel Moyle, who would arrive in Manaus, the capital of Amazonas, in 1908 or in 1910. And I think he passed away 2 years after his arrival. Some say it was maybe because of the yellow fever. And I think after he passed away, local Catholics began to revere Rabbi Moyle as, let's just say, a saint of some sort. And because there was no Jewish cemetery over there at that stage in time, he was buried in, I think, the Christian cemetery over there. And his grave would actually become, I think, at that stage in time, a pilgrimage site. And obviously, we want him to be buried in Jewish places. So the grave, jealous and uncomfortable with the attention that the grave was receiving. So there was, I think later there was a wall built around the tomb. I think the Rabbi of the Manaus synagogue, which actually built over there at that stage in time. So Rabbi Manuel, so that was very, very interesting. And I think Isaac Dahan was a Jewish historian who would actually speak much about him over there, and much is actually chronicled within about Rabbi Moyal in of itself. So we're going to speak about him now. Who was Rabbi Shalom Moyal? So he was he lived between I think he passed away in 1910. His Salula is on the 1st of Adar. Very interesting enough. He was a rabbi of Manaus. Obviously, that's part of the Amazons in Brazil. And as before, his place is a pilgrimage site among many, many people actually visit over there. So that's very, very interesting. So let's say a bit about him. He was actually, he was sent from Morocco through the, I think, chief rabbi of the Manos in 1908, most famously. And this was in order to become the rabbi of the Jewish Kehillah of, I think, northern Brazil over there. He passed away, as we said before, and he became famous for his pilgrimage site in of itself and was revered by many. It says over here, okay, I'll just say what it says. Niftar in 1910. Ramoyal Mekedachat Tsuba, because of the yellow fever, he passed away. Hunitman Beit Kabrot Kituli, Mekevon Shebeit Almin Ayudi Ayamale, Beshel Akadachat Rak Isha Achat, Beshem Kuta Yisrael, Has Chima Le Tapel Bo, Lacha Moto, Ta'anash Kiblom Menu, את סודות הרפואי ומאז עסקה ברפואי מחלות. עם השנים הפך קברו למוקד עלייה לרגל של נוצרים קתולים. So it became a pilgrimage site, this burial place, among even non-Jews. העלו המכנים אותו סנטו זודאי מלגורדו די מאנאוס קרי. הקדיש היהודי עושה הניסים של מנאוס. He was known to have been doing many miracles inside this place. המאמינים צובעים על הקבר, מדליקים נרות, so light candles near his קבר, ומאשרים מתנות, they'll give presents over there, let's just say, מתוך תקווה שמחולל הניסים היהודי הקדוש, ירפא אותם ממחלות קשות. ליד המצב של הרב הנוכו, עשרות ידיים ברגליים תותבות, respectively, over there was. And ליד, אשר נטמן כיפה עליהן, לא נזקק להם, הודות לפעולות הריפוא. That's pointed out of it. בשנות 80, שמע אחינו, there was a very interesting, I think he would have a nephew, if I'm not mistaken, it was a Knesset member, Eliyahu Moyal, which will actually recount over much with regards to Rabbi Moyal, respectively. So that is very, very interesting over here. Friends, anyone that's joining this live video, please subscribe to the channel. We are nearing at the moment a staggering 7,500 subscribers. Let's get to that. So please join our community. We've got great content here. So please subscribe. Just talking about his descendant, Eliyahu Moyal, I think was one of the members of the Knesset. He passed away in 1991 and was a key figure also. I think he was 71 years of age when he passed away about 34 years ago. He was actually educated in Hebrew University in Jerusalem and was actually from a Moroccan family, respectively, from the Salite city. And was very, very famous. He joined the Haganah, if I'm not mistaken. He was a secretary of the Negev district. He would actually work with the Jewish Agency and Joint Chiefs of Staff Emissary, also respectively. So he was another key figure in Brazilian Jewry. So very, very interesting. Friends, we're exploring the history of Brazilian Jewry of yesteryear, the Brazilian Jewish community over here on this special edition. We are nearing at the moment a staggering as many as 7,500 subscribers, which is phenomenal. Please subscribe to the channel now. Now, what did we speak about today? We really encompassed a lot of the history of Brazilian Jewry. We've spoken about how the Brazilian Jewish community really came about in the 1600s and really grew from strength to strength. We spoke about the rabbis that happened to have been in Brazil during that period of time, especially in, we spoke about Rabbi the Fonseca Rabbi. We've spoken about various occasions before here inside the series, and we actually dedicated, if you recollect, a video with regards to the famous rabbi. If you watch over the previous videos recorded on the Chachamim, we spoke about other great rabbis that were in the 1700s, the famous rabbis in the 1800s in Brazil, and how there was an influx of Jews that would come actually from North Africa all throughout the different previous millenniums, respectively, how the Jewish community will end up flourishing and be growing infinitely in of itself, respectively. So we were able to really get an entire picture of Jewry, of Brazilian Jewry also, and so on and so forth. So it's very, very exciting over here. I'm trying to explore more about the great communities of yesteryear in this series as we're really going from strength to strength over here. So that's very, very interesting. So please, everyone, just asking, requesting if fantastic people out there can subscribe to the channel, join our community. Now, we don't just record videos about the famous Jewish communities in various different countries here in this series. We are also exploring videos of great rabbis of yesteryear, especially that actually hailed from these countries. We've actually recorded about 1,350 rabbis already in this series, which is a staggering amount of chachamim. We really are trying to concentrate mostly on rabbis from the Ottoman countries. Also, we are exploring North African country rabbis. We are speaking about rabbis from Asia, respectively, from all these different vicinities. So it's absolutely staggering, and we're really growing from strength to strength at the moment. We do tours on this channel all over Israel. We've toured already about as many as about 200 different places in Israel. We like to do the tours mostly in, let's say, Bet Shemesh, city of Bet Shemesh. We go around Jerusalem. If you see, and we'll just put this over here. Maybe this. We tour all over Jerusalem, and We tour all over Jerusalem also, which is very, very important. We like to explore the different synagogues in Israel, the archaeological places also, which is very, very important. So if you notice, if you look at a lot of the videos we've recorded, we've actually explored a lot of archaeology of different sites. We actually like to record them as shorts, which is very, very inspirational for a lot of people. So I recommend everyone, if you look at the shorts part of the channel, you'll actually see all those sections of the videos also respectively. Now on this channel also what we do is that we record videos with rabbis and Jewish personalities of modern day, where for 2 minutes they'll give over some inspiration and some Jewish wisdom to really inspire the 21st century modern person in of itself. So that's very, very exciting. Now we've spoken in this series recently about great rabbis from South America, hailing from South America. We've especially spoken about countries such as Uruguay also. We have spoken about other vicinities in of itself, included among the countries. We're just going to conclude over here and just go back to the seat where I was sitting in a few moments ago. We spoke about also Cuba. I think we spoke about Cuba, we've spoken about Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay. So we're trying to explore the various different countries at the moment here of yesteryear as we progress this fantastic channel over here, as we've explored the history of Brazil over here. So I think on that note we can leave over here. We've spoken about the synagogue today also, famous synagogues of Brazil, a few of the famous rabbis, tried to get more information on some great Chachamim, and I think we've got a rich understanding within regards to the past and present of Brazilian Jewry. So on that note, thank you very much. Everyone please subscribe and have a great day. Thank you.